Honestly, I just hate it. I just hate it. But I use it a lot. What's up? My name's Chris Tejas. I'm a photographer and videographer based in Ontario, Canada. I mainly shoot portraits, events, weddings. Basically, like if there's a person involved, I photograph it. I have three main lenses that I use for pretty much all of my work when it comes to photography with my Nikon system. And that is a 24mm f1.8s, a 50mm f1.8s, and an 85mm f1.8s. That pretty much covers everything I need to do. If I need to get more telephoto than that, I'll use something else, but 99% of the time that's going to be wide enough for most of the things I do and telephoto enough for most of the things I do. To be honest, 24mm is like my least favorite focal length that I shoot with regularly. I don't know what it is about it, but I just really don't vibe with it. But at the same time, I use it a lot. See, when I'm shooting a wedding, there are just so many instances where 24mm makes a ton of sense. Whether I am, doing getting ready and I'm in a super small area, or I'm on the dance floor and I am like wanting to get right up in people's faces, or I'm doing like these kind of wide landscape shots with the couples going through it. You do a little bit of everything on a wedding day, and 24mm honestly just works for a lot of it. I have this like internal feeling surrounding a focal length that I just can't shake. That like, I feel, and it's a total bias and it's bullshit, but maybe when you've been shooting for long enough, it does start to happen. I don't know. At least that's been my case. I remember the first time I actually shot with a 24mm was 20 years ago, something like that. And I tried it on my Minolta X370, which was my first film camera. And I did not know what to do with it. It was just so wide and felt like, I don't know, it just really confused me. And maybe I took some of that with me for a long time, but even now, like I find that 24mm feels nebulous to me. For a long time, 35mm was something where I was like, I don't really ever shoot that. I prefer a 28 or a 40, but 35mm was something that I came to quite enjoy in the last few years especially, but 24 is something that I still struggle with. I understand its importance, I understand the place where I would use it, but it's something that I don't know that I am gonna find myself wanting to like jump into using all the time if I had my choice. And so it's interesting, right? Because like most common zooms in that like standard zoom range are a 24-70. That is like a go-to. And it's interesting that I always gravitated to Tamron has this 28-75, and I always loved that. And so many people would be like, I would so much rather have the wider and as opposed to that little extra on the telephoto, because you get more out of that reach on the wide end than you do on the telephoto end. But for me, I don't know. I find that like 24mm just doesn't feel right. So many times I want to go a little bit wider or maybe a little bit tighter. What is nice though, shooting on the Z8, I have it set up so that if I'm using the 24mm and I just press the function number 2 button, which is right beside the lens, it'll pop into crop mode and it'll give me a 35mm. So it'll give me that extra little punch in if I ever need it, which honestly, sometimes is really helpful. Like this past weekend, I was shooting at a wedding where there was nowhere good to be during the actual reception when they were doing speeches and stuff like that. There was like 3 places we could be. Now, I wasn't shooting on the 24, mind you, but no matter what, I basically couldn't get tight enough for some of the reaction shots I wanted of the couple because I just couldn't get, I either had to get way too close to them and that wouldn't work because I'd be right in the way of everybody, or I had to be too far back. So being able to punch in was really, really helpful. So with the 24, I do find myself doing that sometimes. And I've actually shot some weddings where I've just bounced between a 24mm and a 50mm, and literally all I did was when I had the 50mm, I would punch in and that would give me like a 75mm equivalent, and when I had the 24, I'd punch in to get around that 35mm. All that to say, I find like a million different ways to not use the 24, but I still use it all the time. So if you are looking at a 24mm and you're thinking like, how do I use this effectively? I do think the images that I get out of it are really nice, and I'm happy with them. But what I will say is that with 24mm, there's probably a few rules you want to think of and ways that I think you can be creative with it that are probably going to make you feel more excited about using it. And that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to be more creative with the ways that I'm using the 24mm so that I get excited about using it. Something you want to make sure is that when you're photographing them, especially if you're in like a portrait orientation, you want to make sure that you are not getting the top of their heads or the bottom of their chin really close to the edge of the frame itself, because that's going to stretch them out in some weird ways. And that's totally fine if that's a look you want to go with. And I've seen images that work great with that, and I've done them too, and I think it can be super cool. But just know that if you want to create like a natural looking portrait with a 24mm, you're probably going to want to have the ability to keep them framed up in a way that gets the bulk of their face in that center point, so you get less distortion. And then also keep in mind that when you're going to edit that and you're in post, you can actually adjust that a little bit so that you get a better, a better balanced image. You might need to mess with the aspect ratio a little bit, and that'll help. The other thing to be aware of with 24mm is the fact that you absolutely are going to need to pay more attention to your frame than with like a 50mm or an 85 or something like that, because two things are going to happen. You're going to have way more room all around you, so there's going to be more stuff everywhere. So you need to be aware of all that stuff that's going to end up falling into the frame because you just have a bigger canvas. The other thing is that even if you are wide open, you are going to have a greater depth of field, so you want to make sure that you are paying attention to those things, because more of them will be in focus. So things that, would blur away into oblivion with an 85mm are going to be more or less in focus when they're behind your subject with a 24mm. That's what makes it so powerful to use it for like landscape portraits or like environmental portraits, because you get so much in focus, but it comes at the price of like having to be aware of your actual frame and what's in it. So that is something I would keep in mind. When it comes to trying to be creative, I would say that there are a few things that you can do to really up the creativity with your 24mm photos. The first one I would say is layers. So really trying to make sure that you are thinking about the opportunity that you have to create layers within your frame and frames within the frame and that kind of thing. So when I'm shooting like, a reception space and I'm doing cocktail hour, for example, there's lots of opportunities if I want to focus on one person to frame them around other people. And that's going to show the sort of excitement and fun, or like on a dance floor, it's the same thing. Like it's allowing you to create a lot of visual elements to kind of slowly lead the viewer into what you're trying to get their attention of, which is the person that you're photographing. Or, if you're doing like landscape or architecture or something like that, looking at all the leading lines and making sure that they're getting you where you want to be. So play with layers and play with lines and play with those things, because that's going to really build out the environment in a way that's going to make your photographs feel more interesting. Secondly, I would say really play with angles. So try like getting down nice and low and shooting up, getting nice and high and shooting down. Really play with angles in a way that maybe you wouldn't otherwise. 24mm is quite wide, so it doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel the way that you see the world. And so you might as well lean into that and try and get a little more ethereal. So like I'll do lots of things with the 24mm where I drop down right into the grass and I lean up a little bit and I get just the profiles of like couples walking or them kissing or like anything like that. Really trying to play with that perspective, because it's not a natural perspective. That's going to be really, really helpful to create stuff that is, creative and fun for people to look at. And the last one I would say is similar to what I was saying in terms of like caution, which is like lean into the weird. If you want to totally exaggerate people's features, you can do that with this lens. If you want to like make people look like they are, a little bit otherworldly or strange, or like you want to play with limb length and stuff like that, the wider you go, the more you'll be able to do that. So with like a 16mm or 12mm, you'll get that in spades. But with something like this, you're just getting into that realm. So you can experiment with it without going too wild. So that would be my recommendation. Really try and like be creative in that way too. All that to say, I use the 24mm all the time. I don't love it, but I do like the results I get out of it. And it's only in practicing and trying that you're going to end up getting better quality images. So get out there and shoot with a 24mm and let me know in the comments below what you think. I'd love to see some of your images too. Go to Instagram and tag me in some 24mm images and let's get to know each other through that. So I'll talk to you soon. Peace.